buenos días, señoras y señores. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Rogamos a las delegaciones, por favor, acercarse a sus lugares para que iniciemos nuestra sesión de esta mañana. We ask all delegations kindly come to your places so we may start our session of this morning.
That's true. I did. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Nice to see you. How are you, sir? Nice to see you. Yeah, pleasure, Albert.
You have your script, right?
I do. I have my script.
Perfect.
Do I stand up or I just read it from the chair?
No.
Yeah, I can.
Right here, you'll read it. Señoras y señores, estamos a punto de comenzar esta mañana. Por favor, acercarse a sus lugares. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start your proceedings. We know your conversations are very important. Perhaps you can find another more appropriate space. We need to start now. Mr. Chairman, we can start.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Good morning. Please be seated if you're standing. Honorable ministers and heads of delegation, distinguished representatives of the member states, Mr. Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Albert Randin, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, Nestor Mendez, permanent observers to the OAS, representatives of inter-American and international organizations, representatives of civil society, the private sector, and other special actors, special guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to welcome you to this 55th regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States, held in the vibrant and welcoming city of St. John's, Antigua and Barbuda. On behalf of all the delegations, I express sincere appreciation to the government and the people of Antigua and Barbuda for their generous hospitality. As we gather here today, we're reminded not only of Antigua and Barbuda's contributions to the hemispheric agenda, but also of the unique identity and national pride that make it such a valued member of our inter-American community. Okay, now we will proceed with the election of the President of the General Assembly. In keeping with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly, we now move to the election of the President of this regular session. I now open the floor for delegations wishing to submit a nomination. Floor is open. Colombia?
Muchas gracias.
a todos. Gracias, señor presidente, por concederme el uso de la palabra. Distinguidos colegas, muy buenos días a todos. Quiero expresar en nombre de Colombia nuestro más sincero agradecimiento al gobierno y al pueblo de Antigua y Barbuda por su cálida acogida y su siempre generosa hospitalidad. Nos sentimos honrados de reunirnos hoy aquí con todos ustedes con la esperanza de que este regreso de una Asamblea General al Caribe sea ideal para que reafirmemos nuestro compromiso con la OEA, sus mandatos, los valores y principios que nos unen y con la solución concertada de los desafíos comunes que hoy nos traen aquí. Confiamos en que además sea una fuente de inspiración para alcanzar los resultados deseados y sobre todo los objetivos concretos a los cuales todos aspiramos. Colombia quisiera postular al ministro de Asuntos Exteriores, Comercio y Asuntos de Barbuda, honorable Everly Paul Shedrin, para presidir esta asamblea. Estamos convencidos de que su liderazgo y compromiso serán fundamentales y serán instrumentales para guiar nuestros trabajos con eficiencia, eficacia y sobre todo con una visión regional hacia el futuro que todos queremos construir. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Colombia. Will anybody second? The Dominican Republic, I understand I call upon you.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Distinguidas delegaciones, muy buenos días a todos. República Dominicana tiene el honor de secundar la propuesta presentada por la ministra de Relaciones Exteriores de Colombia, Su Excelencia Laura Sarabia, en la que se nomina a Su Excelencia Paul Shedrin, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Antigua y Barbuda, para ejercer la presidencia del 50º periodo ordinario de sesiones de esta Asamblea General. Conocemos y valoramos profundamente el compromiso y el espíritu de colaboración del canciller Shedrin, cualidades que sin duda sabrá poner al servicio de todos en esta importante responsabilidad, y por eso confiamos en que bajo su liderazgo este periodo de sesiones será guiado con la debida cercanía, apertura al diálogo y una genuina vocación para juntos construir soluciones que vayan en el bienestar de nuestros pueblos. Muchas gracias.
Seeing no other nominations, I move to approve. Okay? So we're approved. We've already got that. Your Excellency, Everly Paul Chet Green, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Barbuda Affairs of Antigua and Barbuda. On behalf of all member states, allow me to extend our heartfelt congratulations on your election as President of the 55th regular session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. We extend our heartfelt congratulations on your election and reaffirm our unwavering confidence in your leadership during this assembly. Your generous hospitality in hosting this pivotal gathering is deeply appreciated and reflects the spirit of unity and purpose. You may count on our steadfast support as you guide our shared endeavors. Under your stewardship, we are confident that this assembly will foster meaningful dialogue, strengthen multilateral cooperation, and advance the shared values and priorities that unite our hemisphere. I now invite you, sir, to take your place at the head table.
Honorable Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Heads of Delegation, esteemed Ambassador Benoni Bedi, Chair of the OAS Permanent Council and of the General Assembly's Preparatory Committee and Permanent Representative of Brazil to the OAS, distinguished representatives of member states, esteemed Secretary General of the OAS, Albert Ramden, and esteemed Assistant General Secretary of the OAS, Nestor Mendez, distinguished permanent observers of the OAS, representatives of international organizations, representatives of civil society organizations and other social actors, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs and Head of Delegation of Colombia, Her Excellency Laura Sarabia, and the distinguished Minister of Foreign Affairs and Head of Delegation of the Dominican Republic, His Excellency Roberto Alvarez, for my nomination and for supporting me in assuming the presidency of this hemispheric forum, the most important forum in our region. Before we move on to the next agenda item, I'd like to make a very brief announcement, housekeeping, regarding the request for floor procedure. To request the floor, you press the button on your microphone, a green light will appear. That light indicates your request has been received. When granted the floor, the technician will activate your microphone and the light will turn red. Please note that if you press the button for a second time before being given the floor, this will cancel your request and you will lose your place in the queue. Again, that is a matter of housekeeping, for which I thank you for observing. As the next item on the agenda and the order of business, and in accordance with provisions of Article 34 of the Rules of Procedure, we will now proceed with the adoption of the draft agenda for the 55th regular session of the General Assembly. This has been published as document AG/Doc 5874/25. In this regard, I would like to inform that the delegation of the Commonwealth of Bahamas, through a note distributed as a document AG/CP/INF 851/25, requested the removal of the item Reports and Discussion on the Organization's Financial Health, which had previously been proposed by the same delegation from the draft of the General Assembly. With this in mind, I now consult whether we can proceed with the adoption of the agenda. Approved. We now turn our attention to item number 3 on the order of business, which concerns the adoption of the draft schedule of the 55th regular session of the General Assembly. Document AG/Doc 5875/25. As you can see, the closing session is scheduled for 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, June 27th. I would therefore like to ask that the distinguished delegates, for your greatest possible cooperation, so that we can complete our consideration of all agenda items by that time. Please remember that under Article 15 of the General Assembly's Rules and Procedure, the President has the authority to make any adjustments necessary to the schedule under consideration. Since there are no further comments, the draft schedule of the 55th regular session of the General Assembly is adopted. We turn our attention to agenda item number 4. It is now our responsibility to formally adopt the agreements reached by the Preparatory Committee in advance of this 55th regular session. To this end, I now have the honor of giving the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Benoni Belli, the permanent representative of Brazil to the Organization of the American States and chair of the preparatory committee, who will present a report on the committee's work. Ambassador Belli, you have the floor.
Obrigado, senhor presidente, excelentíssimos chefes de delegação, senhor secretário-geral, senhor secretário-geral adjunto, representantes dos Estados-membros, observadores permanentes, ilustres convidados. Na qualidade de presidente da comissão preparatória, tenho a honra de apresentar o relatório das atividades realizadas em preparação para o 55º período ordinário de sessões da Assembleia Geral da Organização dos Estados Americanos. Este relatório, distribuído como documento AG/DOC 5893/25, revisão 1, resume os trabalhos desenvolvidos nas reuniões da comissão preparatória em 15 de maio e 4 de junho de 2025, bem como na sessão ordinária do Conselho Permanente, atuando como comissão preparatória em 18 de junho de 2025. Conforme o regulamento da Assembleia Geral, a comissão considerou e aprovou a proposta de agenda desta sessão ordinária, construída a partir dos temas mandatados pela Carta da Organização dos Estados Americanos, o regulamento e as decisões anteriores da Assembleia Geral. Além disso, foram incorporadas propostas de Estados-membros que destacam eventos históricos, manifestações culturais e temas de grande relevância para a região e para a organização neste momento de transição institucional. Além da agenda, a comissão considerou e aprovou o projeto de calendário da sessão, o qual, embora flexível, servirá de base para o andamento dos trabalhos deste período ordinário de sessões. A comissão também considerou e aprovou as recomendações sobre procedimentos que foram publicadas como documento AG/DOC 5876/25. Essas diretrizes são fundamentais para assegurar que os trabalhos desta sessão transcorram de forma eficiente, transparente e ordenada. Dentre os principais aspectos acordados, destacam-se a duração das intervenções dos chefes de delegação, limitada a 6 minutos, a fim de garantir ampla participação e bom andamento dos debates. O prazo final para apresentação de propostas estabelecido para as 9 horas da manhã da quarta-feira, 25 de junho de 2025. O registro das sessões plenárias em ata integral, enquanto as atas da Comissão Geral seguirão em formato resumido. A utilização do sistema eletrônico já consolidado para pedidos de palavra, assim como a aplicação da ordem de precedência no diálogo dos chefes de delegação. A gravação e preservação dos registros audiovisuais das sessões como instrumento de transparência e memória institucional. E, por fim, a autorização do uso de notas de rodapé em declarações e resoluções, conforme orientações específicas previamente estabelecidas. A comissão também conduziu o sorteio, conforme estabelecido no regulamento, para definir a ordem de precedência das delegações. Os Estados Unidos e a Turquia foram sorteados para liderar, respectivamente, as listas de Estados-membros e observadores permanentes. Senhor presidente, gostaria de expressar minha sincera gratidão a todas as delegações que participaram ativamente dos trabalhos preparatórios. A dedicação e o espírito construtivo demonstrados foram fundamentais para alcançarmos esse momento com uma base sólida para uma Assembleia produtiva. Muito obrigado e agradeço às delegações pela atenção.
Thank you, Ambassador. Having heard the report of the chair of the preparatory committee, I submit to the plenary for consideration the recommendations on procedures for the 55th regular session contained in document AG/DOC 5876/25. I would like to point to the following matters addressed therein, requesting the distinguished delegates to bear them in mind until our work is completed. And these are: 1, in accordance with provisions of Article 18 of the General Assembly's Rules of Procedure, at plenary sessions, heads of delegations have a maximum of 6 minutes for the presentations. 2, the period for presenting new proposals related to the items on the agenda ended yesterday at 9 a.m. The Assistant Secretary General will report to the plenary on the proposals received before the end of that period. Thirdly, this 54th regular session of the General Assembly, which began yesterday, Wednesday, June 25th, is to conclude tomorrow, Friday, June 27th. Fourth, The minutes of the plenary sessions will be verbatim, and the minutes of the meetings of the General Committee will be summary form. Summary minutes. 5. Requests for the floor will follow the traditional order of requests through the average conference unit. And the dialogue of heads of delegation, the floor will be given according to the order of precedence established by a lot by the preparatory committee, which begins with the distinguished delegation of the United States. 6. The General Secretariat is further instructed to take the steps necessary to ensure that the voice recordings of all sessions and meetings held during this regular session are duly recorded, retained, and kept to be made available to the member states upon request. 7. The delegations may include footnotes to the declarations and resolutions, provided that they are expressly announced during the session at which those documents are considered. The period for forwarding footnotes to the Secretariat is the closing session. And number 8, the Secretariat will publish the volume of adopted declarations and resolutions, together with the footnotes received in due time after the close of session. Footnotes announced but not forwarded to the Secretariat before the closing session will be included in the volume but without their text. Those texts will be incorporated into the volume of declarations and resolutions adopted in due course by the Style Committee. There being objections, the procedural matters are adopted. Item 5, report of the Sec General on credentials. With respect to the next item on our order of business, I would like to note that in accordance with the provisions of Article 27 of the Rules of Procedure, the Secretary General has submitted the corresponding report on the credentials of the delegations participating in this regular session. This report provides a record of the credentials received in due form from the delegations of member states and permanent observers, as well as those from representatives of the organs, agencies, and entities of the Inter-American System and other international organizations. Based on this report, the Secretariat will prepare the provisional list of participants, which will be made available to all delegations. After you take note of this report, Item 6, we shall now proceed with the presentation of the annual report of the Permanent Council for the period 2024-2025. It is therefore my honor to invite His Excellency Ambassador Benoni Belli, Permanent Representative of Brazil to the OAS and Chair of the Permanent Council, to take the floor. Ambassador Belli will present the report outlining the activities undertaken by the Permanent Council since the 54th regular session of the General Assembly in Asunción.
Obrigado, senhor presidente. Tenho a honra de apresentar o relatório anual do Conselho Permanente da Organização dos Estados Americanos referente ao período julho de 2024 a junho de 2025, distribuído sob o número AG/DOC 5879/25. Este ciclo foi marcado por desafios significativos, mas também por avanços institucionais e políticos relevantes, sempre orientados pelos princípios da legalidade, do diálogo construtivo e da cooperação multilateral, fundamentos que sustentam a legitimidade e eficácia deste órgão essencial do sistema interamericano. Neste cenário de profundas transformações, o Conselho Permanente reafirmou seu papel como foro político central da OEA, atuando com firmeza na promoção dos valores democráticos, na proteção dos direitos humanos, no fortalecimento da paz e na defesa dos povos das Américas. Destaco como marco simbólico deste período o processo eleitoral que resultou de maneira aberta, inclusiva e transparente na escolha da nova liderança da organização. O embaixador Albert Hamdin foi eleito por aclamação como secretário-geral no 56º período extraordinário da Assembleia Geral e a embaixadora Laura Gil, eleita secretária-geral adjunta no 57º período extraordinário, sendo ela a primeira mulher a ocupar este cargo, um feito histórico que enriquece a representatividade e diversidade da nossa organização. Avançamos também no aprimoramento de nossos instrumentos de governança, com a reativação da Comissão Geral e a revisão do regulamento do Conselho Permanente, iniciativas impulsionadas por Antigua e Barbuda, Bolívia e Brasil. Tais medidas fortalecem a transparência, a previsibilidade e a eficiência do nosso trabalho coletivo. A pauta de direitos humanos esteve no centro das atenções. Celebramos 65 anos da Comissão Interamericana, os 55 anos da Convenção Americana e os 45 anos da Corte Interamericana de Direitos Humanos. Realizamos sessões dedicadas à igualdade de gênero, combate à desinformação, memória histórica e justiça racial, com destaque para as comemorações do Dia Internacional da Mulher, do Dia dos Direitos Humanos e do Dia em memória das vítimas da escravidão e do comércio transatlântico de escravos. A promoção dos direitos das pessoas afrodescendentes e dos povos indígenas manteve-se como prioridade, traduzida em resoluções concretas e espaços de escuta e construção conjunta. Com isso, avançamos rumo a uma agenda hemisférica mais justa, inclusiva e sensível à diversidade. A situação do Haiti permaneceu como tema prioritário. O Conselho Permanente acompanhou com atenção os desdobramentos, buscando apoiar soluções duradouras baseadas na soberania, dignidade e nos direitos fundamentais do povo haitiano. De forma paralela, mantivemos nosso compromisso com a integridade dos processos eleitorais em todo o hemisfério por meio de missões de observação que contribuem para a confiança nas instituições democráticas. A emergência climática mereceu atenção especial, com ênfase nas consequências do aumento do nível do mar para os pequenos estados insulares e comunidades costeiras. A sessão de 16 de outubro reafirmou o apelo à solidariedade internacional e à ação coletiva diante dessa ameaça existencial que seguirá exigindo coragem política e cooperação multilateral contínua. Destaco também importantes momentos diplomáticos vivenciados neste período. A sessão solene, em homenagem ao primeiro-ministro de Granada, Sua Excelência Deacon Mitchell, a despedida oficial do secretário-geral, o Sr. Luiz Almagro, em 21 de maio de 2025, a sessão extraordinária de posse do novo secretário-geral, realizada no dia 10 de maio de 2025. Com responsabilidade, enfrentamos a delicada situação financeira da organização. O Conselho Permanente manteve-se vigilante e atuante, buscando alternativas viáveis e sustentáveis. A preparação do Programa Orçamento 2025 foi conduzida com transparência, diálogo franco e o apoio técnico fundamental da Comissão de Assuntos Administrativos e Orçamentários, a qual expresso minha sincera gratidão. Durante o período, realizamos 50 sessões formais, consolidando o Conselho como o espaço político mais relevante do sistema interamericano. Foram transmitidos a esta Assembleia Geral 13 projetos de resolução e um projeto de declaração, conforme debatido na última sessão regular, em 18 de junho. O estado das negociações está detalhado nos adendos 2 e 3 do relatório. Senhor Presidente, gostaria de reconhecer o trabalho incansável dos representantes permanentes que exerceram a presidência do Conselho durante este ciclo. O embaixador Tarly Francis, de Granada, o embaixador Victor Fernandes, de Barbados, o embaixador Lin Yang, de Belize, e o embaixador Héctor Arce Zaconeta, da Bolívia. Estendo meus agradecimentos aos vice-presidentes, os representantes permanentes da Guatemala, a embaixadora Cláudia Escobar Mejia, dos Estados Unidos, embaixador Francisco Moura, de El Salvador, embaixadora Wendy Acevedo, e atualmente do Equador, embaixadora Mônica Palencia. Registro minha profunda gratidão ao secretário-geral, ao secretário-geral adjunto e às equipes da Secretaria-Geral pelo empenho constante em favor dos objetivos da OEA. Reconheço igualmente o papel essencial dos observadores permanentes, cuja solidariedade contínua e apoio concreto fortalecem a cooperação hemisférica. Desejo pleno êxito ao embaixador Stuart Savage, representante permanente do Canadá, que assumirá a presidência do Conselho Permanente. Conte com o nosso apoio. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Ambassador Belly, for that very complete and detailed presentation of this report, and for the draft resolutions agreed upon by the Permanent Council, which are now forwarded by the General Assembly, or to the General Assembly for consideration. As is evident, the report presented reflects the complex and intensive work carried out by the Permanent Council over recent months. On behalf of the General Assembly, I express my most profound and sincere appreciation to the Member States, permanent and alternate representatives, for their invaluable contributions to the development of this hemispheric agenda. I would like to recognize the efforts, dedication, and commitment of the permanent representatives of Grenada, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, and currently Brazil, who have chaired the Permanent Council during this period. I would also like to place on record recognition to the permanent representatives of Guatemala, United States, El Salvador, and currently Ecuador, who have served as the Permanent Council's vice chairs. That said, I suggest the General Assembly take note of the annual report of the Permanent Council and then proceed to the adoption of the following draft resolutions, for which, based on the information Ambassador Bailey has just shared with us, consensus has now been reached. And these are: 1, draft resolution entitled Addressing the Critical Mental Health Crisis in the Americas; 2, draft resolution entitled Commemorating the Bicentennial of the Amphitheatonic Congress of Panama; 3, draft resolution entitled Hemispheric Commemoration of the 250th Anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America; 4, draft resolution entitled Commemoration of the Bicentennial of the Independence of Bolivia; 5, draft resolution entitled Commemoration of the Bicentennial of the Independence of Eastern Republic of Uruguay, the Liberating Crusade and the Declaration of Independence of the Eastern Province; 6, draft resolution entitled Celebration of Spanish Language Week at the OAS; 7, draft resolution entitled Recognition of the Contribution of Pope Francis to Inter-American Values; 8, draft resolution entitled Advancing Hemispheric Initiatives on Integral Development; 9, draft resolution entitled Reaffirmation of Mandates and Establishment of a Mandate Management Mechanism; 10, draft resolution entitled Financing of the Program Budget of the Organization for 2026 and convening a special session of the General Assembly to consider and approve the program budget for 2026; and number 11, draft resolution entitled Amendment of Article 32(1) of the Statutes of Inter-American Defense Board regarding its headquarters. I now give the floor to delegations wishing to speak about the adopted declarations and resolutions. In that regard, I recognize the delegation of Paraguay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Haciendo referencia a la resolución sobre salud mental, obviamente Paraguay apoya la presente resolución, es una política de Estado también. Sin embargo, tenemos algunas consideraciones con relación a ciertas terminologías que hacen referencia a la estrategia de la OPS, por eso estaríamos presentando un pie de página al respecto. Simplemente eso. Gracias.
Paraguay, noted. I give the floor to the delegation of Panama, of Guatemala, sorry, Guatemala.
Muchas gracias. Guatemala desea hacer una explicación de voto sobre el proyecto de resolución hacer frente a la grave crisis de salud mental en las Américas. La pregunta es si lo puedo hacer en este momento. Ok. Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Guatemala acoge con beneplácito la próxima adopción de la resolución titulada Hacer frente a la grave crisis de salud mental en las Américas y agradece los esfuerzos colectivos que hicieron posible el consenso. Reiteramos nuestro firme compromiso con la promoción de políticas públicas inclusivas basadas en derechos humanos y centradas en las personas que permitan fortalecer la salud mental a lo largo del curso de vida. La República de Guatemala desea dejar constancia de que la presente resolución será aplicada de acuerdo a la Constitución Política de la República y nuestra legislación interna. En este contexto, deseamos destacar también que la República de Guatemala promueve, defiende y protege los derechos humanos de todas las personas sin discriminación alguna, en concordancia con su legislación nacional y lo pactado en los tratados internacionales ratificados por nuestro país. Este principio guía la política institucional de salud mental 2028 del Ministerio de Salud Pública y Asistencia Social de la República de Guatemala, que tiene como objetivo principal mejorar el bienestar de la población mediante la implementación de servicios accesibles, integrales, comunitarios y culturalmente pertinentes, con especial atención a los grupos en situación de vulnerabilidad. Guatemala reafirma su voluntad de seguir colaborando con los Estados miembros y con los socios regionales para avanzar en la implementación de acciones concretas, sostenibles y con enfoque intersectorial que garanticen el derecho de todas las personas al más alto nivel posible de salud mental. Por último, Guatemala desea solicitar a la Secretaría General tomar nota de esta explicación de voto. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Guatemala. Noted. We give the floor now to the delegation of Panama.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excelencias, tengo el alto honor de presentar en nombre de la República de Panamá el proyecto de resolución relativo a la conmemoración del bicentenario del Congreso Anfictiónico de Panamá, que conmemoraremos en el año 2026. Este proyecto no responde únicamente a un interés nacional o conmemorativo. Se trata de un acto de reafirmación colectiva de los valores que nos unen como hemisferio. En 1826, convocados por el libertador Simón Bolívar, plenipotenciarios de las nuevas repúblicas americanas se unieron en la ciudad de Panamá con el propósito de forjar un sistema multilateral basado en la igualdad entre los estados, el sistema republicano de gobierno, la defensa colectiva y la solución pacífica de controversias. Aquella asamblea, celebrada en suelo panameño, dio origen a los principios fundacionales del multilateralismo americano. Esos mismos principios inspiran hoy la Carta de la OEA, la Carta Democrática Interamericana y nuestras más nobles aspiraciones de convivencia pacífica, desarrollo integral y respeto a la soberanía. Al conmemorar este bicentenario, proponemos que el año 2026 sea proclamado por esta organización como el año del bicentenario del Congreso Anfictiónico de Panamá. Esta designación no solo rendirá tributo a la historia, sino que nos permitirá abrir un espacio de reflexión sobre la vigencia de los principios proclamados en Panamá en el siglo XXI, en un tiempo en que enfrentamos desafíos globales que requieren más integración, más diálogo y más cooperación. La resolución propuesta invita a los Estados miembros, a los órganos de la organización y a las entidades observadoras a sumarse a esta conmemoración mediante actividades educativas, académicas, diplomáticas y culturales que resalten el valor histórico del Congreso realizado en nuestro país y su legado vigente para el orden interamericano. Excelencias, Panamá asume con humildad el privilegio de haber sido la cuna de la anfictionía americana y renueva hoy ante ustedes su compromiso con la defensa de los principios que brotaron de aquella histórica reunión: la opción por la paz, la prevalencia del derecho y la cooperación como fundamento de nuestras relaciones internacionales. Esperamos contar con el apoyo unánime de esta Asamblea para la adopción de este proyecto que honra nuestra historia común y fortalece nuestro futuro compartido. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Panama. We recognize and give the floor to the delegation of St. Lucia.
Chair, fellow ministers, distinguished delegates, today St. Lucia takes the floor to endorse this resolution honoring the enduring moral and spiritual legacy of His Holiness Pope Francis. This resolution is more than a symbolic gesture. Rather, it reaffirms the kind of leadership our hemisphere needed and still needs. Leadership rooted in justice, centered on dignity, and unwavering in its commitment to peace. Pope Francis never shied away from speaking hard truths. He boldly addressed poverty, inequality, racism, environmental destruction, and the presiding throwaway culture that devalues human life. These are not just global challenges, but they speak pointedly to the current realities of the Americas, particularly for small developing states like St. Lucia. Pope Francis, through the Laudato Si, reframed the climate crisis as not merely a technical issue, but a moral imperative, one of intergenerational justice. Through his teachings, he emphasized the concept of fratelli tutti, that fraternity and social friendship are not unrealistic expectations, but are the very foundations for harmonious relations in a fractured world. A staunch advocate for the marginalized, Pope Francis stood with and for those on the peripheries with memorable declarations on issues such as migration, where he preferred that borders be seen as bridges and not barriers, referencing the plights of migrants fleeing violence and despair. His words, "Who are we to close doors?" remain quite relevant today in light of current geopolitical tensions. It is for these very reasons that today's resolution matters. It is a resolution that reaffirms the values we champion in the inter-American system, emphasizing that justice, equity, and respect for human rights are not abstract principles. Rather, they must guide our partnerships and policy makings. St. Lucia proudly supports this resolution because it aligns with who we are as a people, committed to faith, fairness, and the belief that leadership should serve, not dominate. We also acknowledge that Pope Francis was the first pontiff from the Americas. His Latin American heritage gave profound context to our region's struggles and its strengths. He proved that the Global South's voice belongs on a world stage and must never be silenced. Mr. Chair, let this resolution do more than honor Pope Francis's memory. Let it challenge us as governments, as representatives, as citizens, to lead with moral courage, to listen with humility, and to build a hemisphere worthy of all its people's dignity. St. Lucia is honored to stand in support. I thank you.
Thank you, St. Lucia. I now give the floor to the delegation of Uruguay.
Señor presidente, señor secretario general adjunto, distinguidas delegaciones, es para mi delegación un honor presentar el proyecto de resolución titulado Conmemoración del Bicentenario de la Independencia de la República Oriental del Uruguay, Cruzada Libertadora y Declaratoria de la Independencia de la Provincia Oriental. En ese sentido, quisiera compartir con ustedes los motivos que nos llevaron a presentar esta iniciativa en este foro multilateral. El próximo 25 de agosto de este año, el pueblo uruguayo conmemorará el bicentenario de un hito fundacional, la Declaratoria de la Independencia de la Provincia Oriental, proclamada en el Congreso de Florida de 1825, junto con las otras dos leyes fundamentales que sentaron las bases de nuestra vida independiente y republicana. Estos actos culminaron un proceso iniciado con la llamada Cruzada Libertadora y constituyen un símbolo de la lucha por la libertad, la soberanía y la autodeterminación de los pueblos. En ese marco, este proyecto de resolución aspira no solo a dejar constancia de un hecho histórico para Uruguay, sino también a destacar su importancia continental, teniendo en cuenta que nuestras independencias nacionales están entrelazadas. A través del mismo se propone declarar el 25 de agosto de 2025 como jornada conmemorativa del Bicentenario de la Independencia de la Provincia Oriental e invitar a los Estados miembros y observadores permanentes a acompañar, en coordinación con la Secretaría General, las actividades conmemorativas que se realicen sin impacto en el foro regular de la OEA. Al celebrar esta efeméride, quisiéramos asimismo reiterar nuestro compromiso con la cooperación y la integración regional, valores que guiaron a nuestros libertadores y que hoy, 2 siglos después, siguen en la base de nuestros esfuerzos. Confiamos en que este proyecto de resolución contará con el valioso apoyo de todas las delegaciones aquí presentes, a quienes agradecemos profundamente su acompañamiento en este significativo aniversario para nuestra nación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Uruguay. Delegation de Bolivia. Adelante.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano presidente. Quiero saludar en nombre de nuestro hermano presidente Luis Arce Catacora y del pueblo boliviano a esta asamblea. En esta oportunidad queremos presentar la resolución para la conmemoración del bicentenario de nuestra independencia de Bolivia. Bolivia nace como un país independiente el 6 de agosto del año 1825. Pero el origen de nuestros pueblos es milenario. Desde tiempos inmemorables, civilizaciones originarias que habitaron en nuestro territorio, desarrollando una cultura y ponderando realmente los grandes conocimientos de la cosmovisión andina y amazónica, que fue ignorada por cientos de años. Ha sido una recuperación y actualmente es la esencia del Estado plurinacional de Bolivia para hombres y mujeres, que ha sido posible a través de este cambio la visualización de los pueblos indígenas y de nuestras culturas. Mediante esta conmemoración evocamos el coraje de revoluciones independistas y honramos la memoria del libertador Simón Bolívar y del mariscal Antonio José de Sucre y del mariscal Andrés de Santa Cruz. Señor presidente, consideramos que nuestro bicentenario es una oportunidad para reflexionar sobre Bolivia que soñamos, pero también de un gran encuentro latinoamericano, caribeño, para darnos un abrazo de todo el recorrido que ha tenido nuestro histórico Simón Bolívar. Es por eso que estamos seguros de que necesitamos continuar esta senda de la construcción de una sociedad plural, inclusiva, para todos los pueblos de América Latina y el Caribe, sobre todo los pueblos indígenas, los afrodescendientes, las mujeres, los jóvenes y las personas de la tercera edad, quienes realmente forjaron y aportaron para que lleguemos por donde hoy nos encontramos. En este tiempo histórico marca la ruta hacia la necesidad de profundizar de nuestro Estado plurinacional sobre la base de una sociedad justa, armoniosa, descolonizadora, despatriarcalizadora, sin discriminación, ni explotación, ni con una plena justicia social para todos. Queremos continuar trabajando para garantizar el bienestar, el desarrollo, la seguridad, la protección, la dignidad de las personas, las naciones de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades campesinas. Queremos fomentar el respeto mutuo y el diálogo intercultural que se hace hoy una necesidad en los nuevos desafíos. A través de esta resolución destacamos nuestra historia y la cultura plural, así como el horizonte común del libertador, justicia y solidaridad que nos une con los países hermanos de nuestra región. Expresamos nuestros sinceros agradecimientos a los Estados miembros por la aprobación de esta resolución para la conmemoración del bicentenario de la independencia de nuestro país, y quedan todos invitados para el próximo 6 de agosto para celebrar con orgullo 200 años de libertad, de lucha histórica de nuestra amada patria Bolivia. Y todos y todas serán bienvenidas y les recibiremos con los brazos abiertos, y muchísimas gracias por ese apoyo.
Thank you, Bolivia. I thank the delegations for your comments. We note your contributions to include the footnote offered by Paraguay, and there be no further comments. We consider the aforesaid resolutions adopted. Before we proceed to the next item on the agenda, I wish to remind delegations that the draft declaration on the question of the Malvinas will be considered by the General Assembly at the 4th plenary session. Accordingly, we move to item 7. We continue work with the presentation by the Chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the OAS. Ambassador Gilchrist will provide us with a valuable insight into the activities and priorities of the city, a key organ of the OAS that plays a crucial role in promoting integral development in the Americas. Without any further ado, it pleases me to give the floor to Ambassador Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Secretary General Ramdin, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, permanent representatives and ambassadors, distinguished colleagues, excellencies, guests, good morning. I extend a special welcome to Secretary General Ramdin, as this is the first occasion on which he's attending the General Assembly as Secretary General. I bid farewell to Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez in his final General Assembly as Assistant Secretary General. Chair, it is my privilege to represent the Inter-American Council for Integral Development to present CD's annual report together with the draft resolution advancing hemispheric initiatives on integral development. 6 months ago, as the permanent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I assumed the chairmanship of the CD within decidedly altered regional and global contexts. At the time, I evoked CD's role in sharing perspectives and unearthing solutions to some of the most pervasive challenges in the hemisphere by bridging divides and inequalities throughout the Americas, coming together and connecting. Clearly, in spite of our differences, we face common circumstances, including expanding gaps between existing education systems and the needs of regional labor markets, worsening disparities between urban and rural areas, and a widening digital literacy and skills gap. In fact, ECLAC's April 2025 report on regional progress and challenges in relation to the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development paints a worrying picture that only 23% of the SDG targets will be met by 2030. In the face of this daunting prospect, the work of the OAS in defending democracy, human rights, security, and development must obey the pressing urgencies of our time and circumstances. In the context of these complex economic and geopolitical landscapes, the notions of resilience and inclusion assume increased relevance and urgency. Hence, the theme of this General Assembly, Building Resilient, Inclusive Economies in the Americas. Indeed, only by recognizing the interconnectedness and interdependence among all areas of our organization's work, and then by working hand in hand to move from dialogue to concrete action, can we jointly advance the prosperity and growth of our people. Herein lies the significance of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, which I have the distinguished honor of representing today. As the premier regional forum for political dialogue on development, CD is mandated to promote cooperation among the American states. In this spirit, CD, under the guidance and counsel of the Secretariat for Integral Development, convened 6 meetings on the need to build equitable and inclusive communities in the Americas to expand access and opportunities for all, closing gaps, reducing disparities, and bridging divides. I emphasize the gaps, disparities, and divides because the unequal capacity of our member states to respond to the unique challenges that matter most to them is a pervasive issue impacting the entire organization. Member states, no matter their size or relevance in the international system, must confront these ever-widening socioeconomic gaps if they are truly to build resilient and inclusive economies. Accordingly, over the last 6 months, targeted dialogue, diverse panel discussions, and relevant calls for action have reinforced CD's collective prioritization of substance over mere discourse. Since our last General Assembly, CD has hosted 3 impactful ministerial and high-level authorities meetings in the areas of labor, science and technology, and tourism. These are the 22nd Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor held in Bogota, Colombia. It marked a new course for labor and employment policy dialogue and cooperation in the Americas, with the adoption of the Declaration and Plan of Action of Bogota, the Future of Work in the Americas, laying the foundations for peace, social justice, and climate action. These documents reinforce a shared regional commitment to a fair, equitable, and human-centered future of work in the Americas. The second was the 7th meeting of ministers and high authorities on science and technology held in Washington, D.C. in December. It laid a meaningful foundation for sustained dialogue on the importance of governance, regulatory and institutional AI frameworks, with the adoption of a declaration and plan of action on the development and deployment of safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence in the Americas. The outcome documents reflect the strong commitment of member states to capitalize better on the nexus of science, technology, and innovation as key drivers of the region's future economic and social development. Thirdly, the 26th Inter-American Congress of Ministers and High-Level Authorities of Tourism, also held in Washington, D.C. in April of this year, reaffirmed regional commitment to sustainable development through heritage tourism, with the adoption of the Declaration and Plan of Action of Ecuador. Harnessing the power of heritage tourism for development in the Americas. Jointly, the outcome documents emphasize the growing role of heritage tourism in distributing more equitably the economic, sustainable, and social benefits of tourism. Looking ahead, as we work in the spirit of a united organization to close gaps, reduce disparities, and shrink divides, I encourage all member states to be present and to participate actively in these ministerials. I would like to recognize Ecuador for hosting the 12th Education Ministerial in March 2026 and Barbados, the 14th meeting of the Inter-American Committee on Ports in June 2026. Chair, I've also had the distinct privilege of working closely with CD's implementing body and technical secretariat, the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development. Both are deeply interconnected. SEDI works towards transforming the dialogue and regional consensus reached in CD into tangible progress. In turn, identifying and sharing solutions and promoting and expanding partnerships to deliver concrete development results across the Americas. SEDI's commitment in particular to strengthening the institutional and human capacities of member states accelerates efforts towards closing gaps, reducing disparities, and shrinking divides in the region. During the past year, SEDI has continued to do just that. Over the period, activities across key areas including education, labor, MSMEs, culture, science and technology, tourism, sustainable development, and port competitiveness focused on strengthening institutional and human capacities to support socioeconomic development and democratic governance in member states. Through cooperation and partnerships and the One SEDI approach, SEDI integrates cross-cutting priorities such as climate action into its programming nexus to advance integral development in the region. SEDI continues to engage with external stakeholders, most notably observer member states, the private sector, and academia, to broaden its reach through new partners for its language cooperation program, renewed agreements with development banks for its climate-related projects, and more thoughtful interaction with regional experts willing to provide technical assistance for South-South and triangular cooperation through CooperNet's Ask an Expert initiative. Upcoming ministerials and working group meetings in ports, education, and science and technology additionally emphasize SEDI's commitment to policy dialogue to amplify data-driven decision-making processes. In 2024, the Secretariat continued to lead its globally recognized approach to integrated water resources management program, mobilizing over $60 million in funding for member states and generating more than $12 million in direct assistance. It provided thousands of scholarships and millions in financial assistance to our region's learners in relevant areas of study. It strengthened port cooperation networks across the hemisphere to better weather the fluctuating demands of international trade. Given my limited time this morning, I regrettably cannot do full justice to the breadth and impact of SEDI's many projects and programs. I would therefore encourage you to review the comprehensive report circulated to member states for a more detailed overview of its progress and efforts. Chair, in closing, I extend gratitude to my Vice Chair, Ambassador Luis Ernesto Vargas, Permanent Representative of Colombia, and to the CD Chair from July to December 2024, Ambassador Elizabeth Darius-Clark, Permanent Representative of St. Lucia, whose sessions on trade facilitation, multi-destination travel, air connectivity, port modernization, and subnational competitiveness laid the thematic foundation for my own tenure. I extend my gratitude. I would like to extend my deep appreciation to the chairs of CD's permanent committees for their support and work over the past year, beginning with the chair of the management board of the IACD, Ambassador Luz Elena Baños Rivas of Mexico. I would also like to recognize and thank those member states which comprise the management board: Argentina, Brazil, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Panama, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the United States, for their efforts to strengthen CD's core remit of regional cooperation and repositioning the OAS as a leader in South-South, horizontal, and triangular development cooperation. The chair of the Committee on Migration Issues, Ambassador Alejandra Solano Cabalceta, Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the OAS, and the chair of the Committee on Partnership for Development Policies, Sebastián Fonseca, alternate representative of Ecuador to the OAS. They have my profound thanks. I would like to specially recognize SEDI's Executive Secretary Kim Osborne and offer my personal and professional appreciation for her leadership, guidance, and perspective over these last 6 months. I thank the team at the SEDI for their work. Finally, if I might speak directly to member states, to my colleagues at CD, and to all those with whom I have connected over the past 6 months, I offer my sincere gratitude to you for supporting the work of this Council and, in turn, the continued socio-economic development of the Americas. We gather at a time of great divide, of a disconnect that is of great concern, between and amongst our countries, our communities, and ourselves. But we must set aside our differences and continue to forge ahead in that time-tested spirit of cooperación solidaria. Our work is too important, our challenges too great and too interconnected, and our realities too complex to forego that spirit. We can only move forward as a region and as an organization by working collectively, closing gaps, reducing disparities, and shrinking divides. In the days ahead, let us share our perspectives. Let us unearth solutions and find meaningful connection as we take charge of our shared mission of advancing inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development in the hemisphere. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention.
Ambassador Gilchrist, on behalf of the General Assembly, I extend our sincere appreciation for your presentation. Allow me to make special recognition of the effort, dedication, and commitment of the permanent representatives of St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and currently St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who have served as chair of CD during this reporting period. I would also wish to recognize the permanent representatives of Dominica, Costa Rica, and currently Colombia for their efforts as vice chairs of this council. CD's leadership and commitment to the integral development of the Americas has been exemplary. Thanks to his dedication and efforts, CD has strengthened his role as a key organ of the OAS in promoting partnership for development among member states. We turn our attention to agenda item 8. We're pursuant to Articles 22 and 24 of the Rules of Procedure. It is now time to install the General Committee, which will be composed of representatives of all member states participating in this General Assembly. There being no comments, the General Assembly, or General Committee, of the 55th regular session of General Assembly is hereby installed. At item 9, we go on with the assignment of topics and election of officers of the General Committee. And in accordance with the agreements reached and recommendations made by the Permanent Council at its last regular meeting on June 18th, following its work at the OAS headquarters, in preparation for this regular session, the General Committee will be responsible for reviewing the draft resolutions that did not reach consensus in Washington. I ask that we note that negotiations will focus solely on those paragraphs with comments, reservations, or that have not yet received consensus from the delegations. Additionally, the General Committee may consider any draft submitted after June 18th, the date of the last Permanent Council meeting, and before 9 a.m. of yesterday, Wednesday, June 25th. This in accordance with the established deadlines. Accordingly, I'm pleased at this time to give the floor to Assistant Secretary General, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, who will provide us with information on documents that are in the situations described above. In that context, Ambassador Mendez, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished ministers and heads of delegation of member states, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to the resolutions that have just been approved by this plenary, the Permanent Council has considered 2 draft resolutions for which consensus has not yet been fully achieved. Certain paragraphs remain under discussion and therefore require further consideration by the member states. Accordingly, the Permanent Council transmitted these resolutions to this General Assembly with the recommendation that they be referred to the General Committee for further consideration. The draft resolutions are as follows. Number 1, draft resolution entitled Calling for concrete solutions to be brought to bear as a matter of urgency to resolve the grave security and institutional crisis in Haiti, document AG/Doc 5882/25. For this draft resolution, 24 paragraphs have been agreed upon by the Permanent Council, and 7 paragraphs received comments from a delegation and are recommended for consideration by the General Committee. Number 2, draft resolution entitled Establishment of a Credentials Committee for Organs of the Organization of American States, document AG/Doc 5888/25. For this draft resolution, 11 paragraphs were agreed upon by the Permanent Council. 1 paragraph received comments and requires further consideration, and 7 paragraphs have not yet been considered and remain pending. It is recommended that the General Committee reviews the paragraphs with comments and the 7 pending paragraphs. Mr. President, I also wish to inform the plenary that these are the only 2 documents that have been transmitted to the General Committee, as no additional documents were received prior to the deadline for the submission of new proposals, which expired yesterday, June the 25th at 9 a.m. This concludes the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, for your report. Delegates, as you have heard from the Assistant Secretary General, the General Committee has a specific mandate and a limited time frame in which to do its work. I would therefore like to remind the delegations that the General Committee must conclude its work tomorrow before the start of the fourth plenary sessions. That is to say, by no later than 3 p.m. To facilitate the General Committee's work, a rapporteur will be elected from among its members, who will be responsible for submitting to this plenary a detailed report on the results of the tasks assigned to the committee. That report, in accordance with the provisions of Article 25 of the Rules of Procedure, is to include a summary of the discussions held in the General Committee, the conclusions reached regarding each of the draft resolutions, and the General Committee's recommendations to the plenary of the General Assembly. I am confident the General Committee will discharge its tasks efficiently and effectively, and that its report will be a valuable contribution to the deliberations of this plenary. I offer the delegations that will partake in the work of the General Committee my advance thanks for their dedication and for their commitment. Let us now proceed to the election of the chair of the General Committee. In that regard, I now give the floor to distinguished delegations for nominations. I recognize the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll be very brief. Antigua and Barbuda is pleased to nominate for the chairmanship of the General Committee the distinguished ambassador of Brazil, Benoni Belli, who has served us well as the chair of the Permanent Council over the last 3 months, and who's also served in the work that we've been doing in Washington in the preparatory committee. There can be no better person to guide us through the work of the General Committee that is before us and to bring it to a successful conclusion. We have great pleasure in nominating Ambassador Benoni Belli. Thank you.
Thank you, Antigua Barbuda. I recognize the delegation of Bolivia.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano presidente. El Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia también tiene a bien proponer aquí en Antigua y Barbuda sobre la presidencia de la Comisión General de las 55 asambleas a nuestro hermano embajador del Brasil, a Benigno Bellis, para que conduzca esta comisión por su gran experiencia. Además, valoramos siempre al hermano país del Brasil, un país que ha tendido muchos puentes para lograr la integración, la unidad latinoamericana y caribeña. Entonces, ¿qué más mejor, ¿no?, que el compañero Benigno, con esa experiencia que tiene, realmente pueda hacer la conducción de este espacio? No podemos hablar de avances y lograr una integración si no tenemos realmente ese liderazgo y la visión del multilateralismo y sobre todo la unión de nuestras regiones para que podamos tener resultados a lo que todos soñamos. Soñar de una integración real, soñar de una participación real, ¿no? Por ejemplo, me traía el recuerdo el hermano de Panamá, donde ha planteado que se van a celebrar 200 años del multilateralismo, que quien fue ese líder, Simón Bolívar. Y nosotros seguimos esta senda, así que nuestro apoyo para nuestro embajador del Brasil. Muchas gracias.
I am pleased, therefore, to announce that Ambassador Benoni Belli, permanent representative of Brazil to the OAS, has been elected chair of the General Committee. As heads of delegations know, the election of the vice chair and rapporteur will take place during the General Committee's first meeting, which will begin immediately in the flex room. In the meantime, I kindly remind all distinguished representatives that the dialogue of heads of delegation will commence shortly. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we ask those delegates who will be proceeding to work in the General Committee to kindly make your way over to the Flex Room. We are about to start the dialogue of heads of delegation. Señoras y señores, les solicitamos a aquellos delegados que necesitan partir para iniciar los trabajos en la Comisión General que procedan al Salón Flex en el otro edificio. Estamos a punto de iniciar el diálogo privado, el diálogo de jefes de delegación, perdón.
It is my honor to open the dialogue of heads of delegation on the central theme of this regular session of the General Assembly. This is proposed by the Antigua-Barbuda government and acknowledged by the Permanent Council through Resolution 1279, entitled Building Resilient, Inclusive Economies in the Americas. Colleagues, we are about to commence the dialogue. As we open the dialogue, I must note that so far we have been very efficient with time and encourage us to continue this good habit with our adherence to the agreed time allocations of 6 minutes per presentation. Without further ado, I will yield the floor to the first speaker on the list of precedents, organized in alphabetical order in Spanish, as established by the preparatory committee. I'm therefore pleased to now offer the floor to the head of delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary General Ramdeen, ministers, ambassadors, colleagues, it's an honor to address you today on behalf of the United States of America. Let me begin by thanking the government and the people of Antigua and Barbuda for hosting this assembly in their beautiful country and for their warm hospitality. It's great to be back in the Caribbean, which has been inextricably intertwined with my own country throughout our history. In fact, one of my country's most prominent founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, was born on the nearby island of Nevis. The success of the United States can be attributed in part to this one man's genius. On behalf of the United States of America and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I'm pleased to extend our congratulations to the new Secretary General of this organization, Albert Ramdeen. Secretary General Ramdeen, we certainly hope that your tenure proves successful and that we'll be able to work together to make our entire Western Hemisphere safer, stronger, and more prosperous, which is what we're trying to do in our own country as well. I think you're all aware that this hemisphere is a special priority for both Secretary Rubio and me. In fact, when the Secretary and I first discussed the possibility of my serving as Deputy Secretary after the election last November, he asked me if there were any reason that I thought we might not make a good team. I truthfully answered that he was a Western Hemisphere guy and I was a Western Hemisphere guy, so maybe he'd be better off with someone with a specialty in another part of the world, like the Middle East or East Asia. He shook his head and said it was exactly the opposite. He was concerned that his duties might pull him to other parts of the world and wanted to make sure that we didn't take our eye off this hemisphere, so that the fact that he and I had the same regional focus was actually a plus and not a minus. So I sit before you here today to reaffirm our commitment to the hemisphere as someone who grew up not just in my own country, but also in Canada, Paraguay, Chile, and Venezuela, and most recently lived in Mexico. And I always feel an obligation to recognize and thank the great nation of Colombia, which gave refuge to my father's family when they fled their native Austria in the dark days before World War II, and to note that my own grandparents are buried outside of Bogota. Secretary Rubio and I very much hope that we can count on this organization as a valuable partner. As some of you may know, the United States was a driving force behind the first Pan American Conference, which convened in Washington, D.C. in 1889. We can talk about the Congress of Panama some other time. That conference took place just a dozen years after the ill-fated French intervention in Mexico and focused on fostering commerce, addressing boundary disputes, and preventing external interference in the hemisphere. It led to the creation of the International Union of American States, which in turn became the Pan American Union in 1910, and eventually the OAS in 1948. So we recognize and respect that this organization has deep roots that extend back almost 150 years. But at the same time, we must ask ourselves how the organization remains relevant today and whether it's achieving its lofty and noble goals. Article 1 of the OAS Charter states that member states establish the organization, quote, to achieve an order of peace and justice, to promote their solidarity, to strengthen their collaboration, and to defend their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, and their independence, unquote. Can we really say that the organization is succeeding in these goals today? We in the United States government are currently reviewing that very question. As you may be aware, President Trump issued an executive order in the first days of this administration directing the Secretary of State within 6 months to review all international organizations of which the United States is a member to determine whether such membership is in the interest of the United States and whether such organizations can be reformed. Upon the conclusion of that review, the Secretary must report his findings to the President and recommend whether the U.S. should withdraw from any such organization. That review remains ongoing, and the OAS is obviously one of the organizations we're reviewing. To be quite frank, and I'm a very frank person, I'm not sure I can predict how that review will turn out. That's certainly something I'm open to discussing at this meeting, so no one can say they're surprised. Let's look at some of the relevant cases. Last year, the entire world witnessed a brazenly stolen election in Venezuela. The opposition not only won overwhelmingly, but had the evidence to prove it, the actas. The regime didn't even bother seriously to dispute the validity of the actas or the electoral fraud. In response to that brazen electoral fraud, what has this organization done? As far as we can tell, nothing of substance. The Chavez-Maduro regime has taken Venezuela from one of the most prosperous nations in our hemisphere to one of the most wretched, subjecting its people to abject poverty and political repression and leaving millions with little choice but to flee. Many, if not most, of the nations represented around this table are home to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of Venezuelan refugees. As recently as last month, the Venezuelan regime ran another sham legislative and regional election that lacked transparency and fairness and included a controversial vote purporting to elect Venezuelan representatives to govern Guyana's Essequibo state. If this organization is unwilling or unable to respond to or remedy the situation, where a regime openly thumbs its nose at international norms and threatens the territorial integrity of its neighbor, then we must ask what's the point of the organization. Similarly disheartening is the ongoing crisis in Haiti. Armed gangs control the streets and ports of the capital city, and public order there has all but collapsed. While Haiti descends into chaos, the unfolding humanitarian, security, and governance crisis reverberates across the region. And again, what has this organization done? Right now, a basic modicum of security is provided by a Kenyan-led multilateral force blessed by the UN. The United States has committed almost $1 billion to this force. We commend the deployment of security force personnel and other contributions from some of the nations represented in this room that made the mission possible. But the United States cannot continue shouldering this heavy financial burden. That's why the United States welcomes a role for the OAS in responding to the political crisis in Haiti. Again, if the OAS is unwilling or unable to play a constructive role in Haiti, then we must seriously ask ourselves why the OAS exists. And just let me be clear, I'm not bringing up Venezuela and Haiti to point a finger of blame. Rather, I'm here to extend a hand of friendship to this organization and anyone who will take it. But friendship is a two-way street. Secretary Rubio and I have to be able to tell our president and our people that our substantial investment in this organization benefits our country. I'm not sure that we're in a position to do that right now, and I'm asking you in good faith to help me make that case. Frankly, I'm afraid that at least some member states, and perhaps even some outside observers, see this organization as a forum to needle the United States. I regret that, as this organization, at least theoretically, can play a valuable role in improving the economic, social, and political conditions for all the people of this hemisphere. Everyone's always talking about the Asian tiger economies. But as we all seek to build more resilient supply chains in our hemisphere, I'd love to help channel U.S. capital towards the rest of the region to develop Western Hemisphere jaguar economies. I sincerely hope that we can have some tangible signs of interest in engaging constructively with the United States in this forum. In this regard, we've nominated Rosa Maria Payá to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. In order to achieve credibility and success, the Commission must prioritize the gravest and most urgent human rights abuses and violations, especially where domestic remedies are unavailable. Rosa Maria Payá is a principled advocate for democracy and human rights. Her moral clarity, principled conviction, and lived experience make her an ideal voice for this body. On behalf of the United States and Secretary Rubio personally, I urge member states to vote for her in tomorrow's election. Colleagues, this is not a time for mere words and slogans about hemispheric solidarity. It's time for the OAS to show results. Let's stand with the people of Venezuela and Haiti, not just in word, but in deed. Let's reject authoritarian and anti-democratic regimes and those that seek to pursue political vendettas through the judicial process. Let's affirm our sovereign right to secure our borders, uphold democratic norms, and strengthen this organization through action, not rhetoric. The bottom line is that the United States is uniquely positioned at this juncture to be an active partner in the hemisphere. We'd like this organization to be part of the solution, not the problem, and look forward to constructive engagement over the next 2 days and beyond. Thank you. Gracias. Obrigado. Merci.
I thank the United States and recognize a second contribution from the delegation of Grenada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished ministers of foreign affairs, esteemed heads of delegation, Mr. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a moment of regional pride to address this 55th General Assembly of the Organization of American States, convened in beautiful Antigua and Barbuda. On behalf of the government and people of Grenada, I extend sincere thanks to Prime Minister Gaston Brown and the people of Antigua and Barbuda for the excellent arrangements and gracious hospitality. It is especially meaningful that this assembly, focused on shaping our collective future, is held on Caribbean soil, a testament and recognition of the enduring strength of regional cooperation in CARICOM. I also extend heartfelt congratulations to His Excellency Albert Ramdin on assuming the post of Secretary General. His election marks a milestone for the Caribbean and presents an opportunity for the OAS to be guided by inclusive leadership attuned to the realities of our small states and the wider hemisphere. Mr. President, the theme of this assembly, building resilient, inclusive economies in the Americas, resonates deeply with Grenada's national priorities and aspirations of the Caribbean. This is not an abstract theme. It is a lived imperative. Like many of our neighbors, Grenada is grappling with the harsh realities of climate vulnerability. Just last year, in fact, Hurricane Beryl struck a region with devastating force again exposing the fragile intersection between climate shocks and economic resilience. As our Prime Minister, Honorable Dickon Mitchell, has said, we're not seeking sympathy, we're seeking partnership. A fair, meaningful partnership to confront climate change, access financing, and protect the lives and cultures of those on the front lines of a crisis not of our making. Resilient economies require bold international cooperation and the realization of climate justice. We need sustained support for adaptation, resilient infrastructure, and early warning systems, delivered not as charity, but as a matter of global fairness and shared responsibility. Equally important is inclusion. Economic growth cannot be counted as success if it bypasses the marginalized. Grenada's development strategy emphasizes human capital, digital transformation, and social protection. We aim to empower women and youth, support rural communities, and ensure that resilience is rooted in people and not just policies. Mr. President, Caribbean has shown time and again that small states united can shape large outcomes, whether in disaster response, climate advocacy, or food security. OAS plays a crucial role in amplifying these regional efforts and promoting shared solutions across the hemisphere. This includes, urgently, support for the people of Haiti. Their suffering must not be or become normalized. Grenada calls for sustained and coordinated efforts to support Haiti's transition from humanitarian catastrophe to a path of peace and legitimacy guided by Haitians. This call goes out particularly to those who have historically benefited from the subjugation and exploitation of the Haitian people. Grenada reaffirms its principled stance on international relations, grounded in mutual respect for sovereignty and non-intervention, regardless of size, political or economic weight, or military prowess. These tenets have allowed us to expand diplomatic ties and mobilize resources essential to our development. In this context, we underscore the importance of deepening South-South cooperation as a vital dimension of the inter-American system. The OAS Charter enshrines cooperation as a pathway to peace and development. South-South initiatives, through technical, economic, and trade collaboration, offer powerful tools to fulfill that vision. For small states like ours, these partnerships are not aspirational, they are essential. In this spirit of solidarity, Grenada expresses our deep appreciation to the government and people of Cuba for the continued support, particularly through the medical professionals who serve our communities with distinction. This enduring partnership exemplifies the real benefits of respectful South-South cooperation. Looking ahead, Grenada reaffirms its commitment to the principles and promises of the inter-American system. Let us use this assembly not only to articulate policy, but to take action. Together, we can build a hemisphere that is more just, more inclusive, and more resilient to the forces that test our unity and resolve. I thank you.
Thank you, Grenada. I now invite the delegation of Guatemala.
Ok, perfecto. Excelentísimo Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Antigua y Barbuda, excelentísimo Secretario General de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, excelentísimo Secretario General Adjunto de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, excelentísimos señoras y señores ministros de Relaciones Exteriores y jefes de delegación, señoras y señores, reciban un fraternal y un atento saludo del Ministro de Relaciones Exteriores, Carlos Ramiro Martínez, quien por compromisos de agenda no pudo acompañarnos en esta ocasión. Agradecemos profundamente al Gobierno de Antigua y Barbuda por su cálida hospitalidad que lo distingue de esta nación caribeña, así como el Secretario General, señor Albert Ardín, a quien felicito y confiamos en que bajo su liderazgo la OEA continuará desempeñando un papel esencial en el fortalecimiento del multilateralismo y la cooperación hemisférica. En Guatemala estamos impulsando una transformación democrática, económica y social profunda, orientada en la construcción de un Estado transparente, justo e inclusivo, en el que nadie se quede atrás. Las políticas que impulsa nuestro gobierno incorporan un enfoque que busca restaurar los derechos más fundamentales de la población, como lo son la educación, la vivienda digna, salud, incluida la salud mental, asociación y manifestación pacífica, entre otros, promoviendo su disfrute sin discriminación alguna para todos los guatemaltecos en concordancia con la legislación nacional vigente y lo pactado en los tratados internacionales ratificados por nuestro país. El respeto y la promoción de los derechos humanos constituye un eje transversal de nuestra política exterior, y Guatemala mantiene una colaboración constante con los órganos del Sistema Interamericano de Derechos Humanos. En julio del año pasado recibimos con apertura la visita in loco de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos y aguardamos con responsabilidad su informe final con el firme compromiso de atender sus recomendaciones. Valoramos también en este marco la decisión de excluir a Guatemala del capítulo 4.b del informe anual del año pasado, lo que constituye un reconocimiento al compromiso renovado del Estado guatemalteco con la protección de los derechos humanos. Asimismo, resaltamos la celebración en nuestro país del 176 periodo ordinario de sesiones de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, espacio que reafirmó nuestro respaldo en la consolidación de la jurisprudencia interamericana. La democracia en Guatemala ha sido defendida con firmeza por la ciudadanía. El acompañamiento de la OEA ha sido clave durante este proceso. Agradecemos profundamente el respaldo brindado durante las elecciones generales del año 2023, así como durante el proceso de selección de magistrados a la Corte Suprema de Justicia y las Cortes de Apelaciones en 2024. La presencia de la misión de observación electoral y las visitas técnicas contribuyeron a fortalecer la confianza ciudadana, la independencia judicial y el Estado de Derecho conforme a los principios de la Carta Democrática Interamericana. La lucha contra la corrupción es también una prioridad nacional y en ese marco Guatemala ha constituido una Comisión Nacional contra la Corrupción que impulsa iniciativas clave como la Ley de Beneficios Finales y la Ley de Protección de Denunciantes, orientadas a garantizar la transparencia y la integridad en la función pública. Señor presidente, destaco las respuestas coordinadas e integrales que hemos desarrollado para garantizar la seguridad regional. Celebramos la adopción de la hoja de ruta centroamericana y República Dominicana para prevenir el tráfico y la proliferación de armas ilícitas, municiones y explosivos. Sumado a ese hito, me complace informar que Guatemala será la sede este año de la 5ª reunión de autoridades responsables de políticas penitenciarias y carcelarias de los Estados miembros de la OEA. Sin duda, estos logros reflejan nuestro compromiso hemisférico para consolidar la paz y la democracia con responsabilidad compartida y solidaridad activa. Deseo también referirme al valioso apoyo del trabajo de la OEA en la zona de adyacencia entre Guatemala y Belice. La labor de la oficina de la zona ha sido fundamental para mediar, empoderar a las comunidades y fomentar el diálogo bilateral. Como lo ha expresado el presidente Arévalo, al optar por el diálogo y los mecanismos jurídicos internacionales, Guatemala y Belice hemos demostrado que la vía pacífica y el respeto de los espacios multilaterales son el camino más efectivo para fortalecer las medidas de confianza entre ambas partes. Honorables representantes, en un contexto global caracterizado por una creciente conflictividad, las consecuencias humanitarias y los impactos transfronterizos afectan de manera profunda a nuestras sociedades. Seguimos con atención la situación en Haití y respaldamos los esfuerzos de la Misión Multinacional de Apoyo a la Seguridad de la ONU en este hermano país. Como muestra de ello, actualmente se encuentran desplegados 150 elementos del Ejército de Guatemala. Reafirmamos nuestro apoyo a la causa haitiana bajo los principios de solidaridad, cooperación y un firme compromiso con la paz y la seguridad y la democracia en nuestra región. Para terminar, permítanme decirles que Guatemala aboga por una OEA renovada, más eficaz, proactiva y centrada en las personas, una organización que acompañe los procesos de transformación democrática y que fortalezca la institucionalidad y que responda con agilidad ante los desafíos contemporáneos. Queremos una organización que actúe con independencia y se mantenga firme en la defensa de los principios que le dieron origen: la democracia, los derechos humanos, la paz y el desarrollo integral. Una OEA que observe, prevenga, apoye y fortalezca a los estados cuando estos emprenden el camino del cambio positivo. Es una OEA que nuestros pueblos necesitan y merecen. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Guatemala. We now invite the delegation of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to make presentation.
Mr. Chairman, honorable ministers of foreign affairs, heads of delegations, permanent representatives, permanent observers, Secretary General Ambassador Albert Ramdin, Assistant Secretary General Ambassador Nestor Mendez, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me, Mr. Chairman, the opportunity to join colleagues who spoke before me in welcoming and acknowledging the presence of Secretary General Albert Ramdin, who is participating in his very first General Assembly at the helm of our organization. We look forward to working with you, Secretary General, to deliver on the promise of the OAS for the peoples of the Americas. Today, we address the aptly chosen theme of building resilient, inclusive economies in the Americas. This theme underpins our efforts to bring peace, prosperity, and the enhancement of the well-being of the peoples of the Americas. However, its application overall will mean something different for each of our countries. There is much, however, that we can learn from each other in this regard, and even more that we should do together to build a secure, resilient, and sustainable future for our people. Our states face common but differentiated challenges. Small island developing and low-lying coastal states like Guyana face a myriad of challenges tied to vulnerabilities related to climate change, exogenous shocks, security, and the ever-changing face of transnational crime, including the proliferation and use of small arms and light weapons, and most importantly, access to financing and to the larger world markets. Climate change and its impacts, including rising sea levels, heightened frequency and severity of extreme weather events, and increased food insecurity, pose unprecedented threats to building resilient economies. To build the resilience needed to effectively adapt and respond to climate crisis, small states must have the fiscal space and access to climate financing. Mr. Chairman, as many of you know, Guyana faces a specific threat to its sovereignty and territorial integrity from Venezuela laying in 1962 an ongoing spurious claim to 5/8 of Guyana's territory, despite the full, final, and binding arbitral award of 1899, which delimited the land boundary between our two states and which we all respected until 1962. This claim and the continued actions of the Venezuelan government in furtherance thereof, in violation of the most fundamental principles of international law, affect and seek to thwart Guyana's ongoing efforts to expand socio-economic growth and development across our country. Today, while the countries of the Americas are away from the physicality of the global conflicts well known to us, we are susceptible to the consequences given the interconnected world in which we live today. However, amid ever-shifting geopolitical tensions, Guyana remains committed to advocating and safeguarding our region as a zone of peace. Guyana, in addressing the issue of poverty, underdevelopment, and conflict at the UN Security Council High-Level Open Debate, which was chaired on June 19, 2025 by our Foreign Minister, Hugh Todd, pointed to the need to confront some of the fundamental issues which impact the building of resilient and inclusive economies. The lack of economic opportunities, lack of access to education, unemployment and exclusion, and the need to strengthen national institutions as part of peace-building efforts. including those institutions that foster social and economic development. It is imperative for us as a collective to remain invested in securing the peaceful, sustainable development of the peoples of the Americas. The responsibility lies with our states to strive for national, regional, and international conditions which foster resilient and inclusive economies. Guyana intends to use its Vision 2030 development plan as a platform to drive major infrastructure projects, education and skills development so as to equip its workforce for emerging industries and the digital economy, support for small and medium enterprises, social protection and poverty reduction, and environmental sustainability. Our efforts to do this would depend, inter alia, on collaboration, cooperation, and peace and stability in the hemisphere and across our globe. These must be underpinned by dialogue, diplomacy, and a commitment to multilateralism, which offers small states a much-needed umbrella under which they can advocate and negotiate matters of hemispheric and global concern. Guyana places high value on multilateralism and the role of the OAS as the premier organization for constructive dialogue and cooperation in our hemisphere. We continue to reaffirm our commitment to the 4 pillars of the OAS: democracy, human rights, integral development, and multidimensional security. In this same vein, Guyana recognizes the need for our OAS to be fit for purpose, to assist in meeting the needs of member states and bolstering the aspirations of every citizen of the Americas. To do this, we must remain open, transparent, and accountable. We must respond to sister states which need and request our assistance. We must focus our efforts on Haiti and delivering much-needed relief to the people of Haiti in the multifaceted crisis that they are facing. For Guyana, the OAS continues to play a distinct role in entrenching the traditions of democracy and democratic institutionalization in the country. To this end, we look forward to welcoming an OAS electoral observer mission as our people prepare to head to the polls on September 1st. Guyana is also keen on contributing to the advancement of regional institutions and looks forward to serving in this regard. I therefore take this opportunity to announce that the government of Guyana has submitted the candidature of the suitably qualified and experienced Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim to serve as the next Director General of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, IICA, at elections by the Inter-American Board of Agriculture to be held by November 3rd, 5th, 25. We will be seeking and hope to count on the support of your respective governments in the coming days. I thank you.
Thank you, Guyana. I now offer the floor to the head of delegation, Haiti.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, Monsieur le Secrétaire général adjoint, Mesdames, Messieurs les ministres des Affaires étrangères, Mesdames, Messieurs les ambassadeurs et chefs de délégation, distingués délégués, Mesdames, Messieurs. C'est un profond sentiment de fraternité que j'ai en prenant la parole à cette 55e session ordinaire de l'Assemblée générale de l'Organisation des États américains, organisée en ces accueillantes îles caribéennes d'Antigua et Barbuda. Permettez-moi à cet effet, au nom du Conseil présidentiel de transition de la République d'Haïti, présidé par son Excellence M. Fritz Alphonse Jean, du gouvernement haïtien et du Premier ministre Alix Didier Fils-Aimé, de remercier chaleureusement le gouvernement d'Antigua et Barbuda, en particulier le Premier ministre, l'honorable Gaston Brown, pour l'excellent accueil et l'hospitalité réservée à la délégation haïtienne. Je tiens également à saluer une nouvelle fois l'élection historique du secrétaire général de l'OEA, M. Albert Landing, en tant que premier leader caribéen à occuper ce poste. Je salue aussi l'élection de Mme Laola Gilles, première femme à être élue secrétaire générale adjointe de notre organisation régionale. Le choix de ces deux personnalités constitue une avancée majeure dans l'histoire de l'Organisation des États américains. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, Mesdames, Messieurs, le thème qui nous unit dans le cadre de cette 55e session ordinaire de l'Assemblée générale, à savoir construire des économies résilientes et inclusives dans les Amériques, revêt une importance cruciale pour tous les pays de la région et notamment pour les États insulaires de la Caraïbe. Ce thème pose en effet une vision claire de l'avenir, celle de bâtir ensemble une prospérité résiliente, attentive à l'inclusion économique des peuples les plus démunis. Pour mettre en œuvre cette vision commune, nous devons renforcer nos capacités à répondre de manière solidaire à toutes les urgences de notre région. Les crises climatiques, l'explosion de nos populations aux aléas naturels, le manque d'accès à l'eau potable, à l'énergie, à la nourriture, voire le risque élevé de famine pour certaines couches de la population, ainsi que la pauvreté extrême, constituent autant de défis urgents qui exigent de nous, pour y répondre, un engagement renforcé à tous les niveaux. Mon pays, la République d'Haïti, est loin d'être à l'abri de ces défis régionaux. Bien au contraire, nous éprouvons les conséquences plus fortement que d'autres en raison des effets conjugués de multiples crises qui accroissent nos problèmes. Voilà pourquoi, plus que jamais, ma délégation voudra apporter sa contribution à toutes les initiatives continentales en matière de développement intégré et conformément aux résolutions adaptées à l'OEA dans le cadre des travaux du Conseil interaméricain de développement intégré. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, comme vous le savez déjà, Haïti fait face à une crise multidimensionnelle sans précédent. Cette crise affecte tous les aspects de la vie nationale et se fait sentir le plus fortement dans les domaines de la sécurité publique, de l'humanitaire et sur le plan institutionnel. En ce qui concerne la sécurité publique, la violence des gangs a occasionné depuis quelques années des crimes odieux. Ils ont assassiné des milliers de paisibles citoyens et citoyennes. Ils ont brûlé des écoles et des universités. Ils ont détruit des hôpitaux. Ils ont pillé de grandes entreprises privées comme de petites gens, comme de petits commerces. Ils n'épargnent personne. Ils enlèvent contre rançon. Ils ont vandalisé de nombreux bâtiments publics, y compris des tribunaux et des postes de police. Ils ont ouvert des postes de péage. Ils ont libéré les prisonniers de prison. De nombreux criminels dangereux courent les rues. De même, la terreur des criminels armés aggrave la situation humanitaire en provoquant près d'1,3 million déplacés. La plupart de ces personnes, notamment les femmes et les enfants, sont en proie à toutes sortes d'abus. La violence barbare et aveugle des gangs entraîne également des conséquences désastreuses sur l'économie et un risque élevé de famine menace près de la moitié de la population haïtienne. Cependant, face à ces difficultés, nous devons reconnaître et saluer le courage et la détermination des forces de l'ordre haïtiennes, la police nationale d'Haïti et les forces armées d'Haïti, qui ont fait montre d'un dévouement sans relâche pour leur mission de protéger et servir. Nous demandons aux États membres et membres observateurs de notre organisation qui contribuent au renforcement de leurs capacités de bien vouloir trouver ici l'expression de la gratitude du gouvernement et du peuple haïtien. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, Mesdames, Messieurs, la situation que je viens de vous exposer, aussi sombre qu'elle puisse paraître, n'est pas une fatalité. Nous croyons fermement que la conjugaison de nos efforts politiques et de nos moyens peut enfin servir de levier pour nous aider à sortir de ce marasme. La République d'Haïti lance un appel à l'OEA en vue de mutualiser tous les efforts de coopération avec les partenaires régionaux et internationaux du pays, tout en se focalisant essentiellement sur les défis sécuritaires, humanitaires et institutionnels en tant que priorité et urgence absolue définie par les autorités haïtiennes. Ainsi, Monsieur le Président, nous sollicitons des partenaires d'Haïti des engagements concrets et à tous les niveaux
dans l'exécution du plan de redressement de la situation sécuritaire en Haïti, notamment l'adoption de mesures adéquates pour empêcher que leur territoire soit utilisé comme point de transit ou d'envoi d'armes ou de munitions à destination des gangs armés, qui constituent le principal levier de déstabilisation du pays. La situation qui prévaut en Haïti est un exemple concret des conséquences désastreuses de la criminalité transnationale, du trafic illicite de la drogue, de la traite des êtres humains, entre autres. Aujourd'hui, aucun pays n'est à l'abri de ce fléau. Pour cela, la réponse au sein de l'OEA doit être efficace, commune, coordonnée et résolue. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, la République d'Haïti se félicite de la volonté du Secrétaire général Albert Randing de placer le dossier d'Haïti parmi les top priorités de son mandat à l'OEA. Dans cette perspective, nous insistons sur le fait que, pour Haïti, la stratégie privilégiée demeure le renforcement des capacités opérationnelles des forces de sécurité nationales soutenues par la mission multinationale d'appui à la sécurité. Qu'il me soit permis aussi de saluer l'engagement de l'OEA en général dans l'aide à la gestion des aspects humanitaires et migratoires de la crise haïtienne, facilitant le dialogue entre Haïti et ses voisins et la mise en place de mécanismes visant à protéger les droits des migrants haïtiens. Monsieur le Secrétaire général, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, je ne saurais terminer mes propos sans remercier très chaleureusement les pays de notre hémisphère qui particulièrement participent aux côtés des forces vives de la nation haïtienne à la recherche de solutions à la crise. Nous continuons donc à faire appel au soutien de tous les États membres comme les États observateurs de notre organisation hémisphérique afin d'endiguer les effets désastreux de l'insécurité en Haïti et d'arriver à créer enfin les conditions aboutissant aux élections et aux autres priorités nationales haïtiennes. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Haiti. We will obtain our final presentation before the luncheon interval. In that regard, I will invite the head of delegation of Honduras to make his presentation.
Señor presidente de la Asamblea General, señor secretario general adjunto, distinguidos delegados. Inicialmente expresamos nuestro sincero agradecimiento al Estado anfitrión por su generosa hospitalidad al facilitar este espacio de encuentro, reflexión y compromiso regional. Comparecemos ante esta honorable asamblea con la firme convicción de que otro hemisferio es posible, uno cimentado en la justicia social, la solidaridad entre los pueblos y el respeto irrestricto a los derechos humanos. Señor presidente, bajo la conducción de la presidenta Xiomara Castro, Honduras asumió con responsabilidad un papel activo en la Comunidad de Estados Latinoamericanos y Caribeños, CELAC, promoviendo una agenda de integración soberana, inclusiva y progresista. Además, fue clara en su llamado a fortalecer los mecanismos de cooperación Sur-Sur, revitalizar el multilateralismo regional y consolidar a la CELAC como una voz común frente a los grandes desafíos globales. En este espacio hemos impulsado la unidad latinoamericana como un acto de autodeterminación, una alternativa a las imposiciones unilaterales y una plataforma para amplificar la voz de nuestros pueblos. Conscientes de que la corrupción ha sido uno de los principales obstáculos al desarrollo justo y sostenible de nuestras naciones, en Honduras nos encontramos en un proceso intenso de reconstrucción institucional y a pesar de la oposición de los sectores políticos confabulados, aún tenemos la determinación de instalar la Comisión Internacional contra la Corrupción e Impunidad en Honduras, como muestra del compromiso inquebrantable de nuestro gobierno con la transparencia, la rendición de cuentas y el Estado de Derecho. No solamente se trata de castigar a los responsables del saqueo del pasado, sino de construir un nuevo pacto social basado en la integridad pública, donde las instituciones estén al servicio del pueblo y no de intereses particulares. Señor presidente, en el centro de nuestra política está el ser humano. Por ello, desde el primer día de gobierno hemos priorizado la reparación a las víctimas de violaciones a derechos humanos cometidas en contextos de represión, criminalización y violencia institucional. Por consiguiente, se han fortalecido los mecanismos de protección a defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos, pueblos indígenas y comunidad LGBTIQ+. Reconocemos que la justicia social no se alcanza únicamente con garantías jurídicas, sino también con el acceso equitativo a educación, salud, tierra, empleo digno y vivienda. En ese contexto, en aras de coadyuvar a fortalecer el sistema interamericano de protección de los derechos humanos, Honduras ha presentado la candidatura de la doctora Reina Rivera Joya, distinguida profesional con un amplio conocimiento y experiencia en la materia, por lo cual solicitamos respetuosamente a las distinguidas delegaciones su consideración y apoyo. En lo referente a la movilidad humana, este es un fenómeno histórico en nuestra región. Honduras ha sido país de origen, tránsito y retorno de miles de personas que emigran en busca de dignidad y seguridad. Frente a esta realidad, nuestro enfoque se basa en los derechos humanos y la cooperación internacional. Por ello, trabajamos para que emigrar sea una opción y no una obligación, enfrentando las causas estructurales como la pobreza, la violencia, el cambio climático y la falta de oportunidades. Por ello, exhortamos encarecidamente a los estados de destino a tratar a nuestras hermanas y hermanos migrantes con humanidad, respetando sus derechos, sin criminalizarlos ni estigmatizarlos. La migración no se resuelve con muros ni con represión, sino que con desarrollo compartido y responsabilidad común. En relación a la crisis ambiental, esta es la mayor amenaza existencial que enfrentamos. Honduras, como muchos países del sur global, es víctima de un modelo de desarrollo depredador que ha provocado deforestación masiva, pérdida de biodiversidad y fenómenos climáticos extremos. La justicia climática, por consiguiente, exige que quienes más contaminan asuman mayores compromisos y responsabilidades. Es, por tanto, que desde nuestro gobierno hemos priorizado la protección de nuestros bosques, cuencas y territorios ancestrales, en diálogo con las comunidades que han sido históricamente guardianas de la naturaleza. Señor presidente, este noviembre el pueblo hondureño será convocado nuevamente a las urnas en un ejercicio soberano de autodeterminación. Nos encaminamos hacia este proceso con el firme propósito de garantizar elecciones libres, transparentes, inclusivas y pacíficas. La participación de observadores nacionales e internacionales será bienvenida como una señal de apertura y confianza en nuestra institucionalidad democrática. El Consejo Nacional Electoral ha sido fortalecido y se están adoptando todas las medidas necesarias para prevenir prácticas fraudulentas del pasado. Aspiramos a que el proceso electoral reafirme la voluntad del pueblo hondureño como única fuente legítima de poder político. Y finalmente reiteramos nuestra adhesión al principio fundamental de la autodeterminación de los pueblos, piedra angular del derecho internacional. Ninguna nación debe imponer su voluntad sobre otra bajo pretextos de seguridad, lucha contra el crimen o intereses económicos. Rechazamos toda forma de intervención, bloqueo o injerencia externa y abogamos por la solución pacífica de los conflictos que prevalecen mediante el diálogo y el respeto mutuo. Honduras no busca aliados que nos dicten condiciones, sino que socios que nos acompañen con dignidad en la construcción de una América más justa, libre y soberana. Señor presidente, el tiempo de los pueblos ha llegado. Desde Honduras extendemos nuestra mano fraterna para seguir construyendo junto a ustedes una región más humana, solidaria y esperanzadora. Sabemos que los desafíos son enormes, pero también lo es la determinación de nuestros pueblos. Y, como dijo la presidenta Xiomara Castro ante la CELAC, la paz, la democracia y la justicia social no se mendigan, se conquistan con unidad y valentía. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. for your presentation. Esteemed colleagues, if we agree, I would like to suggest that the plenary session take note of the important presentations made so far by the heads of delegations and that they be duly recorded in our minutes. The presentation still pending will be given during the second plenary session scheduled to resume at 3 o'clock today in this very room, at which time we'll begin with the delegation of Jamaica. As we get ready to recess for lunch, it is also time to take the official photograph. And in order to ensure that we all arrive at the venue or location for the photograph, we ask that all heads of delegation depart the conference room via the door, which is at the very end of this building. That's to my right. We'll walk over together to the front of the main campus for the photograph before departing for the head of delegation private luncheon. We ask that during this time, the +1 who will accompany the head of delegation to the luncheon move to your respective delegations' vehicles and wait there. Immediately after taking the photograph, all heads of delegation vehicles will leave or depart in a convoy for the luncheon, which is scheduled to take place at Sandals Grand Hotel. It therefore leaves me with no other duty or function at this stage except to thank your participation and to declare this meeting adjourned until this session adjourned until 3 p.m.